Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly radio show that airs at 8:30 a.m. every Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. Today, I'll be speaking with Roxanne Barber, someone I know quite well, the other co-founder of Retake Our Democracy. And we're going to review where we stand 2 weeks into the legislative session. We will also highlight a couple of trends that we have noticed in this and prior legislative sessions, so that bring some kind of structure to the conversation. Last week I spoke, we'll get to that in just a minute, but just a few quick announcements. Last week I spoke with Javier Barraza, an activist who is involved in many different national, international, and state initiatives and advocacy, all focused around the intersection of environmental, social, racial, and economic justice. It was a really fascinating interview, and I highly recommend it. I want to remind you that if you're listening to the show while driving around town and you miss any of this show, or you want to catch an older show like the interview with Javier, just go to retakeourdemocracy.org, click on the button on the right side of the homepage says Retake on the Radio. And all of our shows are listed there in chronological order, so you can binge watch Retake on the Radio and cancel your Amazon Prime subscription.
And you're saying watch because they're video recorded as well, not just audio.
That's right. This is all being audio and video recorded up to YouTube. So
it just sounded funny. You can watch the radio show.
Yeah, well, what the heck. I also want to say that the session is in high gear. So we have resurrected our weekly Zoom huddles. Our huddles are really informative events and activities. Basically, what we do every Wednesday at 6 o'clock for about an hour is we have Retake huddlers join us on Zoom, and we talk about what's been going on in the last week and what's coming up in the next week in the legislative session. And we talk about the ins and outs and what's going on behind the scenes. And it's a great way for you to really learn how the legislative process unfolds and where you can insert yourself effectively and weigh in and have an influence. And it's also a great way to meet other advocates. We have people from all over the state who join us every Wednesday. So if you want to do that, go to retakeourdemocracy.org, click on the Actions and Events menu, scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see information about our next huddle and a link to register, because you must register to participate. So while you're on our Actions and Events page, you can also find a link to recordings of all of our Zoominars. These are webinars that feature legislators and issue experts who share information about bills that we are supporting. Our most recent Zoominar offered a panel discussion of the Green Amendment, what it is and what it isn't. It included Maya von Rossum, the founder of the Green Amendment for the Generations, who has led the effort to pass green amendments in New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, Montana, and now in New Mexico. She was joined by two attorneys, one from New York and one from Pennsylvania. They shared with us how they were able to pass green amendments in their states and how they've been implemented in those states. We also had on the panel our legislative leader on this, and that's Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez. And given the amount of misinformation about the Green Amendment and what it would do if it was adopted in New Mexico, folks who are deep into implementation in other states helped us understand the truth about the Green Amendment. And we will be sharing the recording of the discussion with legislators to dispel industry misinformation campaigns. You can view the recording by going to retakeourdemocracy.org, clicking on the Actions and Events menu in the home page, and near the top of the page, you'll have a link to get to our Zoominars. I think you'll find them interesting. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land, and we want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of that land. We could learn a good deal from them. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, Roxanne. How about we start with a quick description of how Retake operates year-round, sort of in preparation for each legislative session?
You want me to explain it?
Yeah, how about?
Okay.
I'm talking too much.
We have a blog at retakeourdemocracy.org that informs you about a lot of the issues throughout the year, but also some months before the legislative session, we start focusing on issues that we have either heard or believe will be coming up in the form of legislation at the following session. The radio show, which you're listening to right now. And we have Zoom webinars on issues. I think we're done with those for this year.
I hope so.
Yeah, we've done modernizing the legislature. We did local choice energy. We
Gun
just
violence prevention,
gun violence prevention. We just did the Green Amendment, and there are probably some others. And as Paul
health security.
has already said, those are available on our website. We also, collaborate with various allies, mostly nonprofit organizations, coalitions to help develop legislation in some cases, but mostly to advance legislation that those organizations have created. And we make it easier for advocates across the state to support the issues they believe in by providing them information through the website and through our legislative alerts that you got to sign up for those too. That's on the website. There's a button on the right hand side of each page, and I think it says get legislative alerts. You can sign up for those.
Alerts,
yeah. And then you'll hear about all the bills when they're coming up for hearing, who you should contact, links to talking points, that kind of thing. So I think that's it.
Okay, well, that is what we do year round, and the whole idea is to try and make it so it's more accessible to get to the to weigh in the legislative process, because it's a pretty tortured thing to just try and do it on your own.
Yes, it is.
Ask Roxanne. So let's talk about some of our bills. Can you tell us, Roxanne, about, and this isn't necessarily Retake's top 3 bills, but what your bills are that you're really rooting for?
My top 3 bills. That's a tough one because there's so many great bills this year, and we really have a hard time prioritizing. But we just can't track all the great bills that are out there. So it's always hard to make a decision. We've got 27 on our high priority list. We swore to ourselves we would only have 15.
We swore to ourselves we would only have 10.
Oh,
then 15.
That didn't work. 20. That didn't work. Somehow we're up to 27.
It's Groundhog Day at our house.
Every year. I would say what I think are most significant for me, HB 7, which is reproductive and gender affirming healthcare freedom. And I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later, right? We're not going to get into these bills at this moment. Also, HJR 2 and HJR 8, which are bills that will modernize our legislature. We'll talk about those. And then SB 165 is local choice energy. That's a big one too. So before we get into all those,
I'd like to offer some observations on 2 trends that seem to permeate each session. The first is misinformation from industry and from our legislature. From our administration. The level of misinformation in last year's hydrogen fiasco, where we had a hydrogen bill.
we had like four
or 5 different bills or different iterations of the same bill popping up in committees with misleading titles, so that it just wasn't clear when legislation on hydrogen was coming up. And we defeated all of those bills. And despite that, the state has gone on and is obviously advancing hydrogen. And so we have a bill that we're strongly opposing in the legislative session that would advance that work, and that's HB 174. Anyway, another example of misinformation was the horrible misinformation campaign around the constitutional amendment for the governor to now nominate PRC appointee commissioners instead of people voting for him.
Yeah.
And a lot of this.
Wait, just to be clear, this was a couple of years ago,
right,
but we're seeing the fallout from that now because she's just made her appointments last month.
Right.
Go ahead.
And but the way in which that was passed is we're seeing that same kind of activity every year. But it was misinformation about the PRC, horrible misinformation about how they were corrupt and how they missed meetings and things like that. That was very old information, like 15 years ago. And the last 3 or 4 years, the PRC has been really vigilant in protecting ratepayers and the environment. And you saw that in their decisions on Avangrid, Four Corners, and San Juan.
That's why they wanted to get rid of them.
Yeah. And so, the PRC admitted to having difficulties managing their workload. And so they asked the legislature, and the legislature authorized a study of the PRC and how it could be improved. And the findings of that, and it was done by a national organization that does nothing but these studies of legislature effectiveness and so forth, and PRC regulatory effectiveness. And they came back and they basically said the program is horribly underfunded. They have approximately 1/5 the staffing, expert staffing.
The agency, you mean the Public Regulation Commission itself.
Yeah, 1/5 the staffing of typical regulatory agencies. So if you've got 20% of the staff to do the work, how in the world are you going to do it effectively and efficiently? And that was purely and simply from the governor starving their budget. And so, at the end of the day, the governor ignored all the recommendations in the study and advanced a bill that was calling for a legislative resolution so that she could put on the ballot that she could appoint the PRC commissioners. And that campaign was funded by PNM in a dark money campaign. It was really horrible stuff. And so the session we're seeing today, or right now, we're seeing that same kind of misinformation, not necessarily from the governor's office, but especially from the chambers of commerce and the utilities.
And industry.
And other industries, but especially in relation to any kind of minimum wage increases, paid family leave. You'll find the chambers of commerce all sweating and spouting off at the mouth about how business will just dissolve if we.
Local choice energy.
Right.
PNM is really fighting that one.
But getting back to the minimum wage, they'll make it sound like the sky is falling if you pass it, and small business will go out of business and will lose jobs and local revenue, when exactly the opposite is the case. And so, that's another form of that misinformation. The second trend that I've observed in state government and the legislative process is the systemically underfunded state agencies. Basically, what we have found in New Mexico is that the legislature is good at passing legislation or regulations, but is not very good at ensuring adequate funding to implement those bills. And so, for example, that's the reason why the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit was filed, to sue the state to force them to put more money into K-12 education. And as a result of that, we've seen some tremendous change. We've seen the passage of a constitutional amendment to significantly increase the funding for early childhood education, and we've seen huge increases in funds to K-12 education and salary increases to teachers. And another manifestation of that is a bill that maybe Roxanne can talk about. That's HB 140, the Tribal Education Fund.
Yeah, well, this year, HB 140 is going to set up, it passed its first committee, but it's got a ways to go. It's the Tribal Education Trust Fund, and it's going to appropriate $50 million. And it gives the tribes a lot more autonomy. They can use the interest from that trust fund to fund language revitalization programs. They can use it for Wi-Fi resources. A lot of these students, lower income students or students living on the reservation, don't have the Wi-Fi resources. So as soon as they leave school, they go home. They can't do their homework, or they can't use Wi-Fi, and so they're at a disadvantage. Also career readiness programs and other kinds of things. So we are really hoping that bill gets through. That was introduced by Rep. Derek Lente.
And just to underscore that, all of this is possible because of advocacy in the community about the underfunding of key functions of government. And we see it in relation to regulation of our environment, in methane that is released unchecked, produced water, 1,500 leaks in the between 2016 and 2019, and almost no fines for those
And
leaks.
produced water means dirty water.
Yes, yes, that's toxic water, not just
Yes.
dirty water.
Right.
So all of this is that's another theme that we've seen in the legislature is that we fail to fund what we want to do, and that in a context of having the largest surplus ever. And so we're starting to see some bills like the Native American Education Fund or
The trust fund.
Trust Fund and some water bills. And Roxanne, would you like to talk to us about that? It looks like we're finally going to make some investments in water.
Yeah, there are, wow, more water bills than I've ever seen in any session this year. So we talked to Norm Gom, who used to work for the Interstate Stream Commission, and now he's part of the Middle Rio Grande Water Advocates and another organization that's escaping me. We said, well, what are your top three? Because there are probably 7 or 8 water bills. The top one has not been introduced yet, so we don't have a bill number or an official name, but Norm told us it is called the Water Security Planning Act. And I believe that's going to allocate or appropriate a lot of money.
$150 million,
Okay.
I think.
Right, right. The other one is SB1. That's the Regional Water Systems Resiliency Act that was introduced by Peter Wirth. And that will it creates a regional utility. It creates not a regional utility authorities and gives powers and duties to all the little patchwork water systems and associations, and it helps them work together.
So this is a much bigger deal than it sounds. It's like you've got all these water systems across the state, some of them with maybe 10, maybe with 50 people who subscribe to a well, and they don't have anything like the capacity to access federal funds to improve their water system. And so if you allow them to bind together in a regional authority, then they can collaborate and seek federal and state funds to maintain their wastewater and their water.
Maintain and improve their systems. Right. The other one is SB 57, and that is simply called Funding for State Water Trust Fund, and that was introduced by Peter Wirth as well. And it would transfer $250 million from the general fund to the Water Trust Fund.
That was created in 2006 with $40 million.
The Water Trust Fund.
The Water Trust Fund.
Right.
And since then, there's been virtually
been
nothing
historically underfunded.
And it's used to fund infrastructure across the state in water projects and so forth to better preserve water.
And we really got to get on top of this. You know, the situation with climate change is not getting any better.
So water is a huge priority for the state, and we have 3 of our 25 bills, top bills, from water, but we also identified some other bills that we just couldn't simply include in the top tier that are also very important. Do you want to talk about those for a second, Roxanne?
Are you talking about water bills?
Yes, yes, the second tier water bill.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood. Why don't you go ahead and...
Okay, we need to take a brief break here while Roxanne looks through the water bills. To remind our listeners that they're listening to KSFR, you're listening to KSFR, and KSFR is more important than ever in these times of
Hi,
so
yeah.
we're back. We had to take a brief break. We had a cat who was choking, and so we didn't want you to hear the hat.
Excuse me. So yeah, the other water bills are SB 167, Strategic Water Reserves, SB 195, Water Protection Permanent Fund, HB 121, Protect Our Water, acequias, rivers, and aquifers. So, you know, suffice it to say, there are a lot of water bills, and this is a good thing. We need to pay attention to water, and it seems like this year they're really starting to focus on that. So that's great.
And when the cat started choking, I was in the process of doing our little promo in the middle of the show. We need to take a brief break here to remind our listeners that you're listening to KSFR, and KSFR is more important than ever in these times of misinformation in social media and mainstream media. KSFR gives you the straight news. They give you the BBC. They give you Amy Goodman and Democracy Now, and great local and state broadcasts about state issues and even local issues. And a lot of culture and great music. All of this comes to you free, but it's not free to produce. They have a studio, they have engineers, they have managers, and they have unpaid hosts. And so what I would encourage you to do when you finish listening to the show is go to ksfr.org, look for the donate button at the top of the page, and click and donate 10, 20, 50 bucks, whatever you can afford.
100.
And look at it as your ticket for admission to a lot of great local programming. They need your support. And on behalf of KSFR, I want to thank you for your generosity. So.
Okay, so let's talk about a little more in depth about some of the bills that we mentioned earlier. In my top three, HB 7, reproductive and gender affirming freedom. That protects access to reproductive and gender affirming health care. And that includes psychological, behavioral, surgical, pharmaceutical, all kinds of medical care. And it prohibits discrimination against a person's use or refusal of reproductive health care services. And it prohibits prosecution or punishment for accessing any of those types of health care.
Is this the bill that also prohibits local jurisdictions from banning abortion services and things like that?
Yeah, it prohibits the creation of any law, ordinance, policy, or regulation that conflicts with the provisions of this act. So that is
because that's what's been happening down in Hobbs and in southeast New Mexico.
Right.
They're trying to prevent Texas women coming to the state.
And our new Attorney General, Raul Torres, has tried to keep them from doing that. I don't know if he's going to be successful, but
he will.
He's trying.
We're awfully glad we elected that.
Yeah, we love Raul. The other one that's I think is really important because it's just going to have an impact on everything, and that's modernization of the legislature. There are 2 House joint resolutions that have been introduced so far. There could be a third. And I believe both of these will need to go to the ballot, and then voters will decide. Yes. And that is HJR 2, which is legislative session changes. And one thing that does is it makes that 30-day session in the even numbered years, turns it into a 60-day session.
And provides a 5-day break in the middle. And oh my God, is that a good idea?
Yes.
It's a bad sign that Roxanne and I are toast and we're just ending the second week.
Yeah, 6 more weeks to go.
Yay!
We're gonna need some sort of happy pill or something, energy pill. So that one, yeah, will extend the 30-day session in the even numbered years to 60 days, and it will also allow bills of all subjects. I mean, a lot of you may know that in that short session, typically it's just tax and revenue bills or bills that have to be deemed germane because they're connected somehow to tax or revenue. But this will change that. Any bills can be introduced. And it will also add a 5-day recess in the middle of every session. So you have 30 days of session, 5-day recess, 30 days of session.
And aside from our burnout, it's really important that happened, because now then legislators can take a break and start to synthesize the information they've been receiving and talk to constituents and stuff. Otherwise, they're just running from one hearing to the next and getting information from lobbyists, and that's not healthy.
And the other HJR 8 is legislative salaries. Our legislators, this is a volunteer legislature. They do not get paid, and they don't just work during the session. They work all year. They're answering phone calls and emails and requests from their constituents all year. They're in interim committee hearings. These people work for nothing. If we pay our legislators, then we can get real working New Mexicans to be able to afford to serve and represent the real working population of this state. So that would create legislative salaries, and that would be determined by a 9-member citizen commission. That's all I'll say about that. You can go look it up at nmlegis.gov, or you can look on our page at retakeourdemocracy.org and go to NM legislation, and that's where you'll find all of these bills that we're talking about today, and with many of them links to talking points and then links to the bill language itself.
Can you talk a little bit about SB 19 for just
Yes.
a minute? We're running out of time.
Yeah, SB 19 is law enforcement and public safety telecom. I don't know why they put the word telecom on the end. This was put together by a great group of Indivisible SOS, that's Indivisible Santa Fe, people in working with law enforcement agencies across the state. I mean, and God knows we need this. Another person, Tyree Nichols, who was killed in Memphis last month.
That was just unbelievable.
I know. What it will do, it'll improve the training for law enforcement officers across the state at all levels, and improve the coordination and the sharing of information between all the different kinds of law enforcement agencies, and just really help improve our law enforcement officers.
The thing I like about that bill is it creates a system of accountability. If you're trained in something, you're expected to implement that kind of strategy. And if you don't, and if there's incidents, that data will be shared with the state. Right now, police departments in counties are not required to share information.
Yeah.
And that makes it very hard to do any planning or targeting of resources for training.
So that's SB 19, and you can find that on our NM legislation page at retakeourdemocracy.org. The other, I won't say anything about these except to mention them. There's a paid family leave bill coming up. It hasn't been introduced yet. We really need that because do people get federal paid family leave? No, it's only on state. It has to be on a state level. HB 25 is a minimum wage increase bill introduced by Rep. Christine Chandler. We really need that. And SB 165, which we already talked a little bit about, which is local choice energy. You can learn about all these bills at our NM legislation page.
And we have like so much more to tell you and no time at all to tell you. So come back next week, go to retakeourdemocracy.org. Subscribe to our blog, subscribe to our alerts, and you'll be able to keep track of what's going on in the New Mexico State Legislature. They're making the rules you have to live by, so you might as well get engaged. And
thanks,
to
everybody.
all of you, thank you very much. Stay healthy, stay happy, and most of all, stay active, because that's the only way we fix this mess. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.